Welcome to this presentation titled 12 Cups of Coffee, or How to Find a Mentor in Adult Education. This presentation is geared toward new teachers in adult education who are contemplating mentorship as a step in their professional development. You are probably wondering about the title of this presentation. Why talk about having coffee? The theme of this presentation was inspired by a project undertaken by Meg Gebhardt, the blogger and author of a book called 52 Cups of Coffee. When Meg started her senior year of college a few years ago, she wasn't sure what to do after graduation, but she knew she wasn't ready for the corporate 9-to-5 life. She decided to take up a personal challenge. She would have a single cup of coffee with a different person every week for a year. As chronicled on her blog and in her book, Meg ended up traveling the world. She had coffee with people she had been meaning to reconnect with. She also had coffee with people she wouldn't ordinarily have spent time with. She had conversations with friends and people she met through friends and through professional connections. She gathered many life lessons and heard stories about the ways people made their career choices. This quotation inspired Meg's 52 Cups of Coffee project. You will be the same person in 5 years as you are today, except for the people you meet and the books you read. The logic behind her 52 Cups of Coffee project is that the most significant changes in your life come about as a result of the people you meet and the conversations you have. For Meg, her project celebrates the power of connection. I have adapted Charlie Jones's quotation to suit our work as teachers. You will be the same teacher in 5 years as you are today, except for the people you meet and the lessons you teach. In other words, the most important changes in your development as a teacher will come about as a result of the people, the students, colleagues, mentors, advocates, supervisors, and thinkers in our adult education field with whom we cross paths, and the conversations you have about your teaching and learning. I chose 12 cups of coffee because I thought that a 52-week project seemed unrealistic for most working teachers. Maybe I'm wrong. I would love to know if some teachers out there take up Meg Gephardt's challenge. That would be a blog and a book worth reading. In any case, I was thinking that a typical teaching cycle is 12 weeks long, and that a good challenge would be to have a cup of coffee with a colleague once a week for each of those 12 weeks. There are also about 12 weeks during the summer months, so perhaps when teaching duties are less intense, a teacher could have a cup of coffee once a week during those summer months. Many teachers work multiple jobs. They often aren't able to locate themselves in any one institution for an extended period of time. This often means they don't have access to a permanent office space or teacher's room where they can meet up with colleagues on a regular basis. The 12 cups of coffee model seems well suited for that work dynamic, as you are encouraged to find connections wherever you are. This presentation, geared toward new teachers in adult education, has 2 goals. The first is to invite reflection on mentorship as seeking connections and conversations. Ordinarily, when we think of finding a mentor, we focus on finding a person who is the right match for us. And when we can't think through the logistics of who will mentor us, we tend to close off why we seek mentorship in the first place. And that is, we want to talk to people, to ask for advice, but also to be heard, to have an opportunity to share our questions, concerns, curiosities in a way that helps us feel connected to others. As I noted on the previous slide, focusing on connections and conversations rather than finding the right match also seems to be a more suitable mindset for our real lives as adult educators, who often teach at different programs and interact with multiple groups over the course of just 1 week of teaching. A second goal for this presentation is to help you to devise your own 12 cups of coffee action plan, smaller in scale, but motivated by the same need for connection as captured in Meg Gephardt's project. Conversations are so routine in our everyday lives that we may not think of conversations as anything particularly special in our professional lives as teachers. At the same time, when we don't have opportunities to regularly talk to colleagues and peers about our teaching, we often can feel alone in our profession. I myself can recall times in my teaching life when I was working 3 or 4 part-time jobs, and I rarely had any time to get to know other teachers at the various schools, much less talk to them about my teaching. While I always enjoyed working with the students, I can remember feeling somewhat disconnected from the teaching profession. There were no opportunities for spontaneous conversations in the teacher's room, or opportunities to just listen to how other more experienced teachers taught their classes. I think many of us seek out mentorship out of a basic need for connection with other teachers. In fact, the conversations we have as teachers can serve a very important purpose in our professional development, as summarized in this quotation. Conversation is a powerful and generally unrealized vehicle for professional learning. The next quotation helps us to further understand Danielson's point about why conversations are such a powerful vehicle for the professional learning of new teachers in particular. Professional conversation can provide a space where new teachers can come to terms with themselves in their new role. Conversations provide a place where new teachers can explore the connections and contradictions between their previous life and the new one, make sense of their identity in relation to the institution and the culture. Regular professional conversations can also provide a safe environment for the new teacher to test out personal expectations of the job. They can help new teachers to not only do the work of a teacher, but to grapple with the infinitely complex work of being a teacher. This quotation calls attention to the value of professional conversations for all teachers, but in particular for new teachers, who may be making the transition from pre-service teacher, graduate student, or teaching assistant to the primary role of teacher. As this quotation suggests, through professional conversations, teachers gain perspective on the local context in which they teach, as well as the broader culture of the teaching profession. I particularly like the last sentence as it calls attention to the value of conversations for supporting our teaching practice, what we do as teachers, and our professional identity, or the work of being a teacher. As teachers, we build our knowledge base and pass on that knowledge through stories and conversations with others. If we change the kinds of conversations we participate in, we will inevitably change the way we think about teaching and learning. And that change lies at the heart of our growth as teachers. I'd like to share some tips that I have culled from Meg Gephardt's book and others who have endorsed a similar approach to professional growth. In the next few slides, let's take a look at 7 strategies for developing your own 12 cups of coffee action plan. Strategy number 1. Start with a list of 3 or 4 people. There is no need to come up with a full list of 12 at the start. As Meg Gephardt started to schedule coffees, she thought of other names of people she'd like to meet. Some people even sought her out. You can start with the known. Start with colleagues and friends. You can also come up with lists of thinking about past connections. Also, think 1 degree of separation. Ask a colleague to introduce you to a colleague. And finally, venture outside your teaching area. You don't need to focus on people who teach in the same content area as you. For example, as an ESL teacher, I have always loved talking to math teachers. I often enjoy hearing them talk about how they break down complex problems into digestible parts, or how they address students' fear of math in their classrooms. Strategy number 2, focus on your goal. Set a time under 45 minutes for the meeting. It's useful to meet at the teacher's classroom or office and use the walk to and from the cafe to chat. Strategy number 3. Be clear about your intentions. Tell the other person you want their input on starting your career in the teaching profession in adult education. But also be mindful of strategy number 4. Be open to where the conversation takes you. You don't want to be focused on asking for a job lead or for recommendations of good places to work. You don't want to focus on interviewing the person. Remember, you are interested in spending time with the person, getting their advice, and hearing their story. Strategy number 5. Plan ahead. Think of 2 or 3 questions that you think would be interesting for the person to answer and would help you think through your own teaching goals and questions. Strategy number 6. Document your thoughts and reflections. This may seem like a rather trivial point, but it's easy to forget. Take a small notebook to your meetings. Taking notes conveys your purposefulness. If you don't jot thoughts down, you won't remember the specifics of each conversation. Strategy number 7. Share what you have learned with others. This strategy aims to promote your own reflection on the conversations you have. By telling another teacher, a friend, or a family member what you talked about and what you learned, you give yourself a chance to reflect on the value of the advice. You may be able to generate new questions that you hadn't thought of before. When I first heard about the 52 Cups of Coffee project, I felt immediately both excited and daunted by the idea of asking people to have coffee. While I don't consider myself a particularly shy person, I think I worried that most teachers suffer from meeting fatigue, which made me fearful that I'd be turned down a lot, or I'd get an initial polite yes and never hear back. And I also thought of how intimidated I felt as a novice teacher and wondered if I would be able to find the courage to ask the people I really did want to talk to. I also thought of teachers who, by personality, are not highly extroverted. Thus, this kind of social experiment would be awkward and even scary. Consider Peter Thompson's view that having coffee with people, without an ulterior motive like securing a job lead or asking for a letter of recommendation, in fact, gave him more confidence about meeting new people. To further illustrate Peter Thompson's point, I'd like to invite you to listen to Stephanie Geem, an ESL teacher in Boise, Idaho, who shares her experiences seeking out mentors after she left graduate school. First, allow me to introduce Stephanie. Stephanie Geem is the coordinator of the Services to Older Refugees program at the English Language Center in Boise. She became interested in teaching English when she became the assistant coordinator of Project Shine, students helping in the naturalization of elders at City College of San Francisco. She received her MA in TESOL at San Francisco State University in 2010. Since then, Stephanie has taught at a number of community colleges and intensive English programs in San Diego, Albuquerque, Chicago, and Boise. As you listen to Stephanie, think about ways that you have made professional connections. To what extent were those connections intentional or by accident? You can pause the presentation to discuss Stephanie's thoughts with your colleagues or jot down some ideas.
It wasn't until after I finished school that I sought these relationships. Once I had seen just how much I had benefited from working with someone who knew more than me, who could help guide me. So once I started teaching, I looked for people that I really connected with, people that could teach me something new, people that were experts in whatever they did. And that way I started looking for mentors, and I still continue to do that today. Currently, I work at an English language center for refugees, and I see the director of the program as my mentor. Even though he's my immediate supervisor and boss, I don't think that my lack of knowledge is seen as a weakness. In fact, during our interview, I told him that I had very little experience working with refugees, and that was actually one of the reasons why I wanted to work there, which was to work with refugees and learn more about them and take what I had already learned and apply it to this new environment. So all of my mentorships were kind of on accident. It was something that just happened through program or through a class where I had to work with an instructor in their ESL course at the community college. But I'm really happy that happened, and I feel very lucky to have had those relationships and to even continue to have contact with these people who really influenced the way that I teach and my future goals in my career.
Here is another story about making connections. First, I would like to introduce you to Erin. Erin Lake is currently employed as an English language instructor at the American Academy of English in San Francisco, California. After teaching English in South Korea, Erin decided to pursue her MA in English at San Francisco State University. She is particularly drawn to understanding the intersection between the fields of technology and TESOL. Now let's listen to Erin give her advice to new teachers about seeking out conversations with seasoned teachers. She talks about not being afraid of taking on responsibility for this outreach. Can you relate to the fear that Erin is talking about? What advice would you give to other teachers who are fearful of reaching out?
I think the biggest piece of advice that I have for new teachers seeking out mentors is to not be afraid of taking on responsibility. This is a very rare opportunity for you to have a mentor teacher offer feedback on grading or instructional techniques. So do not be afraid to take on that responsibility, because the opportunity may pass you by or may never come again. In addition, I think that I would say to new teachers that you should be open to what seasoned teachers have to say. So although you might be coming from a program or an institution where you've learned a lot about new instructional techniques, new theories, there's really no substitute for the years of experience that individual has had in the field. And whether or not you take their advice, you should at least hear it.
Now that you have learned about the 12 cups of coffee idea and listened to Stephanie and Erin's experiences, it's time for you to make some plans for your own 12 cups of coffee action plan. We will focus on 2 of the 7 strategies mentioned earlier. First, let's focus on strategy number 1. Start with a list of 3 or 4 people. Of course, if you're feeling motivated to generate the full list of 12, that's terrific, but there's no pressure to generate the full list. In fact, once you start having coffee with people, you may think of other people to connect with. So I think a starter list of 3 or 4 people is a good way to get started. You can list names of colleagues and friends. Also think about rekindling past connections, such as a former professor or a former boss. Also think in terms of 1 degree of separation. Perhaps colleagues can introduce you to someone they know. Also, don't feel restricted to talking only to people in your teaching area. If you teach adult ESL, you may wish to talk to someone who teaches math to adults, or to someone who teaches ESL to a younger age group. Write down your ideas in a notebook. You may wish to pause the presentation to give yourself time to generate your list. If you are listening to this presentation with colleagues, take an additional 5 to 10 minutes to share your lists with each other. Share why you chose those individuals. By listening to one another's ideas, you may come up with more ideas about whom to talk. Now we will focus on strategy number 2. Plan ahead. Think of 2 or 3 questions that you think this person would want to answer. By thinking of questions that the person might want to answer, you keep yourself from getting overly focused on what you want to learn from the person. By thinking about what the other person would want to talk about, you keep yourself open to learning about things you may not have thought about asking. Write down your ideas for questions in your notebook. Pause the presentation so that you have time to generate some ideas. If you are listening to this presentation with colleagues, share your questions with one another. We're coming to the end of this presentation. And to close, I'd like to recap the major themes. First, conversations are underappreciated opportunities for professional learning. In pursuit of mentorship, we can focus on seeking connections and conversations, not merely on finding the right person to be our mentor. By expanding the kinds of conversations we participate in about teaching and learning, we signal our growth as teachers. Your individual conversations help to cultivate a culture of connection in our adult education profession. Meg Gephardt called her year of making connections a social experiment. We can think of the 12 cups of coffee model as a social experiment that supports our professional growth as teachers, but also one that cultivates a culture of connection in the field of adult education. In sum, I am fascinated by this idea of 12 cups of coffee because it reframes mentorship as a series of conversations about teaching and learning, not merely as a process by which you are matched with others. Moreover, I think the focus on connections and conversations reminds us that mentorship need not take the form of a single relationship, and that no one person has all the answers about teaching and learning. Of course, I think mentorship in the traditional sense is still incredibly valuable in our field. But the point of this presentation is to remind us that we need other ways of bringing the mentorship spirit into our field more organically. I'd like to close this presentation with a tribute to one of my very good colleagues, Gail Weinstein, who was a leader in adult ESL education. As you can see here, she was a very active leader in the professional organization of TESOL, Teaching English to Speakers of Other Languages. She created a curriculum model known as Learners' Lives as Curriculum, which served as the basis for the creation of popular textbooks, such as Collaborations and Stories to Tell Our Children. Throughout her life, she mentored many teachers, and I was one of them. She loved to kayak, do the Lindy, and always enjoyed a good laugh. It's fitting to end this presentation with Gail's words. Gail definitely loved a good cup of coffee, but more than anything in her professional life, she loved connecting with teachers over coffee. Here is what Gail once said. Her words reflect the power of connection and conversation as we have explored in this presentation. I imagine communities of teachers who can't wait to get to work, who meet with one another in faculty rooms and living rooms to share what their students have said, and who create together a blueprint for other teachers who want to go down this road. They will be the pioneers, and their experiences will be extraordinarily valuable. Thank you for listening, and see you at the coffee shop. The Literacy Information and Communication System, or LINCS website, includes a wealth of resources to support the induction of new teachers through mentorship and enhance teacher effectiveness in adult education. In particular, the Teacher Effectiveness page features a comprehensive adult education teacher induction toolkit. The toolkit is an integrated multimedia resource intended for instructional leaders, mentors, and beginning teachers. The toolkit contains information briefs, instructional strategies and techniques, online interactive tools, online courses, and role-based step-by-step implementation guides. The Mentoring Guide for Teacher Induction and the Adult Education Teacher Induction Toolkit give guidance and resources, as well as support a systematic process for orienting and training beginning teachers in adult education. The guide includes tools for beginning teachers to assess their strengths, needs, and teaching contexts, identify professional learning priorities, and work with their mentors to improve their instructional practice. It also supports mentors with effective mentoring strategies and tools to guide mentoring activities, such as classroom observations. It supports reflection and discovery and offers suggestions for improved teaching practice.